It's the very stupid results of a very stupid ideology being rolled out by very stupid people. So do be quiet, do stop judging other people. And if I were you, I'd do a little bit of research.
Are you joking?
If I were you, I would do the tiniest bit of research before opening your mouth. You're embarrassing yourself. That's probably why people wouldn't want to come to your show.
All right, embarrassing yourself.
Douglas Murray is never walking on eggshells, which is why there are so many instances of him getting into fiery disputes with woke activists and social justice warriors. Douglas is one of the last people ready to bend over only so he can pander to the stupidity of the woke mob. Today, we are going to cover a few juicy examples of him wrecking some people with some really stupid ideas. Let's get into it, starting with a report of kids identifying as animals inside a classroom in Britain.
This stuff reads like a joke, but it's really not funny when you get into the weeds of it. This is limitless self-identity gone bonkers.
Yeah, it's the very stupid results of a very stupid ideology being rolled out by very stupid people. Basically, everything has come unstuck in recent years by the ever-expanding alphabet acronym people.
Starting off strong, that was savage.
Where the fight for gay rights and minority sexual rights turned into this demand, this claim that there was no such thing as biological sex. As Peter Tatchell and others well know, the argument for gay rights was won by saying, we're just like the rest of you. It was also won by saying, you know, we just want to live and let live. Yet the gender ideologues have done something totally different. They've said, you don't have the right to have your own say in this.
Absolutely unleashed.
We are right, and you have to agree with us. They say, we're here, and instead of saying we're here, we're queer, and just get used to it, it's we're here, and as a result, biological reality doesn't exist. Well, clearly, this very, very idiotic ideology is causing havoc. Just today, Piers, there's another tape from a school in Scotland where some poor boy is having to explain to his teacher that there's only two biological sexes and that the gender woo-woo stuff is nonsense. And yet again, it's the student having to educate the teacher because the teacher has been indoctrinated into stupidity due to the gender ideologues.
Look at the expression of the lady on the panel. She can't help but laugh. She probably thought the story with the boy in Scotland was very amusing. I'm sure she's a woman full of amazing ideas ready to take on the bigoted mind of Douglas head-on. Okay, now it's time to listen to her give her explanation on the whole gender debacle. Let's see it.
Okay, Ava, you're laughing. Why?
Well, it's just quite amusing, really. I mean, we're talking about children that are 12 and 13. I mean, when I was at school, I had a girl who identified as a horse, but not in this sort of like problematic way that we're now labelling it. She didn't actually think she was a horse. She was just quite strange and walked around and, you know...
But nobody at the school then, no teachers would have tolerated that in the way that this is now having to be tolerated.
No teacher would have tolerated bullying of that child. And that's what this teacher in Sussex has done. They've said it's not acceptable for boys in that class to take the mickey out of someone who's obviously clearly just a child and they're exploring their imagination.
Who says they're a cat?
Yes, but... Piers, they're 12.
And he's actually interfering with the lessons by talking in cat language, including meowing, and if people don't go along with this, refusing to cooperate.
Yes.
That is not just having a bit of fun being a cat. That is actually assuming the identity of an animal that this person is not, and then insisting everybody else conform to it.
This is beyond ridiculous. I can't believe we're actually talking about this stuff in this manner. Nobody cares about what children are doing in a classroom. It's when supposedly abstract-thinking adults are taking them seriously and saying they were born the wrong gender. But okay, now watch the madness of what happens next after she says this.
That is madness.
That's not what's happening. What's happening is there's a child who's slightly more imaginative than their peers and they are acting out this sort of fallacy and that's fine. But to make it about trans, this is where it gets dangerous, OK? The Telegraph...
Oh, it's very damaging to trans people. I agree.
Right, OK.
I agree with that.
The reason it's most damaging, the Telegraph have been reporting this, it's up 400% in the last couple of years, them reporting trans issues. I don't understand why they've got this weird obsession with going into...
Let me explain why.
I love how her speech took a more defensive undertone because she started to realize just how ridiculous all of this stuff got. Brace yourself for Piers' dramatic reply.
No, it's quite gross.
Let me explain why. When you have in women's sport 6'4" biological males destroying biological females at elite sport level in swimming pools, on racetracks, in other sports, that's when it becomes a full frontal assault on women's rights to fairness and equality. Yeah. And when you include them going into dressing rooms and so on and mixing with biological females, then there's a safety issue.
Now listen as Piers hammers in the point, calling spade a spade.
When you have, as we had in Scotland, a male rapist identifying at his trial as a woman to get put into a woman's prison and being sent there by the female boss of Scotland at the time, who's now obviously in her own troubles, that is why this is happening. Kids are watching all this stuff, and as kids do, they want a piece of the action.
No, Piers, don't be ridiculous. There is nothing, there's no similarity between a child wanting to be a cat when they're 12 years old and someone competing in the Olympics.
Oh, there is.
There is
Peter,
no comparison.
It all started with the question of what is a woman. If you believe that kids can be whatever they want, then you also believe that adults can be whatever they want. And there is a direct link between kids in the classroom and athletes on the field. Now let's watch Douglas give the burning answer to all of that nonsense.
If I may, first of all, Ava rather unfortunately misspoke earlier when she said that the schoolgirl in question was acting out of fallacy. I think you meant a fantasy. But actually she is acting out of fallacy.
Thanks ever so
fallacy.
Much. But do you know what I find fascinating?
She was right with fallacy.
Do you know what's fascinating about Douglas?
Which has been propagated. A fallacy which has been propagated by gender ideologues and is doing profound damage to gay people, among others, in our society, as well as women.
Like
and
you
let me
ever
explain
cared.
very quick. Let me explain very quickly why. I can't quite hear you. I can hear you muttering something. Let me quickly explain why. A poll that just got published in the United States showed that among the general population, support for gay marriage has been starting to decline in the last year. Why is that? It's because the arguments that actually brought about liberal rights for all minorities in the last few decades have started to get turned on their head.
Absolutely spot on. They went to such extreme lengths that they are actually doing more harm to the people they claim to help.
And turned against people. What is the source of that? It is the gender ideology movement. What is the tripwire for the general public? It is children. It is people learning that their children are being taught nonsensical things. It is being seen by the wider public, most of whom are heterosexual and don't need to identify as cis or anything else. It is being seen from that vantage point as the LGBTQIA+ movement losing control of itself. And so a backlash is starting. And the backlash is coming because people are lying to children and are using children for medical experiments. There's nothing funny about that. There's nothing that should cause levity in that. It should be treated by adults seriously.
Medical experiments is indeed the correct terminology to use here. Considering the fact that 80% of kids that experience gender dysmorphia transition back to their initial sex later in adulthood, giving them puberty blockers in childhood is nothing short of a great insanity. I wonder what other important life-changing decisions these activists believe that little children are fit to make at such a young age. Should we also allow them who to marry?
OK,
no,
Ava?
So, Douglas, it's really important, actually, all of that point that you've just brought up, it's very on brand for you because, you know, you like to stoke fear. You've actually made a career out of it. I'll take you back to your book, The Strange Death of Europe, and you made a big fright. You know, you frightened the entire public about your thoughts on Europe, and we ended up in Brexit. You weren't the sole contributor to that, but you were a big voice.
Can we stick on to
the
theme?
I will. And then, you know, now we're talking about LGBTQ.
If I may say so
and you're
very
creating...
quickly,
Hang on, you spoke. I'm speaking.
No,
I'm speaking.
I'll
you spoke.
reply.
This is, I mean...
And I'll reply.
Hello. I haven't
let
finished.
Ava speak, please,
Now,
Douglas.
back on the trans issue, when you're talking about LGBTQ, what you've just done there is basically say that the whole of America, who have historically had a problem with gay marriage, are now turning on it because a couple of children in a classroom in Sussex want to be a cat. If you can't see the ridiculousness in that argument, I can't help you.
The bigger issue is there is no such thing as gender ideology. We all have gender identities. You identify as a man, and I fully respect you.
He's just shaking his head in disapproval. That was funny. Let's skip over to the part where he drops the bomb and gets to respond to those accusations.
Very quickly, I don't know, Ava, anything about your career. I don't know if you have one. but you did try to imply that you knew something about mine, and you just showed you know nothing about it, because actually my 2017 bestseller, The Strange Death of Europe, was not about the EU. So you should learn at some point to read more than the title of the book before commenting upon it.
It was about, and it was about migration.
But let me very quickly...
And how rude are you? How rude are you?
Very quickly... You
built a career out of fear-mongering, and you're now importing those evangelical American ideas onto UK television.
You haven't even built a career, have you? You haven't even built a career.
What are you talking about? I'm on the same panel as you, Hun, and we're getting the same...
Do you know what? I'm going to wrap it up by saying you've both got wonderful careers, or you wouldn't be on Piers Morgan Uncensored.
That was absolutely unleashed. She tried to come back from that burial by saying that she's on the same panel, but the truth is that Piers brings in lunatics on his show all the time, so they can embarrass themselves on television. It's not any different with her. That was absolutely brutal by Douglas. She got so irritated by it while he was chilling and calmly spitting the verbal jujitsu. But enough of this. Let's move on to another incident where Douglas got to confront a woke activist that's trying to argue why it should be acceptable to cancel people for the things they say. Starting off with her speech first. Here Silvana, the woke activist, was telling a story about how a bunch of far-right peeps in her country managed to get away with some violence they have committed. And then she said this.
2 people are in custody at the moment relating to this incident. That's 2 out of the 60. And it means to me that 58 people were very much free to express themselves, even in the most aggressive and detrimental way possible, without any ramifications. In fact, the irony is that the mere reason my friends, party members and comrades were so brutally attacked in the first place is because of exercising their right to the freedom of speech by claiming that Black Pete is a racist caricature character. So I beg to differ that so-called political correctness or wokeness results in less free speech. I can safely say from my own personal experience that it seems to me that more can be said by some rather than as well as less by others.
Okay, so she related a part of her experience as a way of minimizing the cries of people complaining about the extremism of cancel culture. Let's see how Douglas is going to address all of this.
I'm looking forward to discussing this. I've been thinking about this subject for a long time, and as was just mentioned, wrote a book that just came out in English, German, I think it's about to come out in French and other languages, called The Madness of Crowds, which is an attempt to try to think about some of these things that are going on, some of the what I describe as crowd madnesses that particularly the online world encourages, where very often we cancel people, destroy people for saying something that everyone thought until 24 hours ago. And we're making up and evolving a lot of our ethics and I'd say the metaphysics as we go along. And it's very confusing.
Very confusing. Especially for those people that were the ones orchestrating the canceling and ended up being canceled too later on.
However, I think we can identify certain trends that are going on, and one of them is that there are a set of what I describe as tripwire issues, which any journalist, citizen, absolutely anybody, if they just nick one of these tripwires with their foot, can find causes total career implosion. They, broadly speaking, there are a few others, but I say they come down roughly to gay, everything to do with women, particularly relations between the sexes, everything to do with race, and absolutely everything to do with trans. So I decided to do a chapter on each in my latest book to try to say what are the discussions we perhaps ought to be having and the ones that we're not having.
And this is what the social justice warrior gleefully glossed over. She tried to say that political correctness can provide more free speech for those that are afraid to speak up, because they are marginalized, while completely ignoring the toxic environment this will create for the majority of people, which Douglas excellently pointed out. When you prioritize the feelings of the minority like this, you sadistically sacrifice the rights of the majority. But let's give her a chance to make another point, and then we'll listen to Douglas respond.
Because you see, it's not that it is no longer allowed to say what you want to say. It's about being held accountable for what one says, taking responsibility for the words and the language that one uses. One has to be aware that words are not neutral, that they have histories and connotations, and One just cannot ignore that. Words have power, and they can reinforce systems of inequality and suppression. Thus, you can still use these words. You can still be free to speak. Yet you need to be aware of what you're saying, and that if your words are racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, well, somebody might just call you a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, or a transphobe.
She said, "It's not about tackling free speech. It's about taking responsibility for what one has to say." And what does that responsibility specifically look like? Hopefully, you are not insinuating that people should lose their jobs over what they said on Facebook with their friends. Even so, initially there was still a noble cause behind this type of extremism that we see today. Here's Douglas recognizing that.
So what is it that's going on? Well, let me, as it were, do the opposite of straw manning and try to steel man this, because this is something I also happen to agree with. It seems that one of the things we're trying to do is a very noble aspiration, and it's something like this. We're trying to come to a position where somebody with a competency, indeed anybody with a competency in a particular area, is never held back from achieving what they could achieve because of some characteristic. So no young girl growing up anywhere thinks they can't be something because they're a girl. Nobody who's LGBT thinks they can't get anywhere because of their sexuality, and nobody, whatever their skin color, is held back from anywhere because of their skin color.
The time where it was only about that is long gone.
That seems to be almost agreed upon. I put it out there as I say, it's one that almost across political sides, you could say, is a common aspiration. The problem that I try to identify and go into, among other things, is what if we're, in trying to achieve that, doing something that's making things an awful lot worse? Now, it is, as you all know, incredibly unwise for any man to talk about women. So I'm going to completely duck that one today. It's extremely unwise to talk about race if you have my skin color. So I'm also going to duck that one. And let me today just focus on the one crampon that I have on the edifice of social justice, which is the G bit in LGBT. And I'm going to treat myself to showing you an example of what I think is going on, which is very unwise.
Absolutely spot on. That single line has decimated her whole argument. What if by trying to help the minorities through hurting the majority, you are actually making things worse for everybody? Let's see the examples Douglas has to give here.
One day later, and the BBC's front page of the news website had as one of its lead stories that day the news that a minor reality television star in Britain called Ollie Locke had announced that he and his fiancée, Gareth Locke, were going to join their surnames to become the Locks after their forthcoming nuptials. Underneath that was the headline that the death toll in Indonesia had risen significantly overnight. The New York Times, on the 16th of October 2017, this is the international edition of the New York Times, the business section leads with a two-page story headlined, "Gay in Japan and No Longer Invisible." And it relays the story of a Japanese businessman who had come out in his office in Tokyo, and nobody had any problem with it.
Now just watch what happens next.
And what's more, as the story went on to say, Japan isn't a very homophobic society. So this was, man comes out in not very homophobic country and nobody cares. But that was the 2 pages of lead news story in the New York Times. If you turned to the culture section in the New York Times that day, there was a picture of 2 men dancing, and it was the news that the New York City Ballet had decided to turn one of the female roles into a male role so that 2 men were dancing together, and they had a massive news story about what an incredible breakthrough this was in the obviously previously very virulently heterosexual world of ballet. So But for some reason, we have fallen, and we can get into why perhaps, into this very strange, fragmented view of society, which fragments along these very specific lines.
Stellar observation and some great food for thought served to these insistent social justice activists. The big takeaway from Douglas here is the following question. If you continue to shove all of this gayness down people's throats, what are the chances that they are going to get even more repulsed by it? I'm not going to pretend like I have the perfect alternative solution, but it's just something that the activists need to put to good thought. Because as we've seen in the beginning, this continuous propagation has damaged the public's impression of gays as a whole. Okay, now let's move on to Douglas confronting a woke teenager activist on the attraction to fat people.
Yeah, exactly. Well, joining me now is comedian James Barr and best-selling author of The Madness of Crowds, Douglas Murray. Well, Douglas, let me start with you. I don't get this Sam Smith thing. It just seems like every week he deliberately... I'm sorry, they, even though there's only one of them. Why is Sam Smith they?
No, please do address Douglas first, but I just need to correct you if you're going to misgender. That's how they identify themselves.
Why is one person they?
Because that's how they identify.
Why have I got to go along with it?
Because they've asked you to.
So what? No one's asked me to.
Even the Pope respects people's pronouns now.
I don't have to respect anybody's pronouns.
Well, that's fine, as long as that's your decision.
My pronoun is hottest man in the world.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to call you that.
Well, go on then.
Some may disagree, but if that's what you are, then cool, I will address you as the hottest man in the world.
Throughout the entire interview?
Throughout the entire interview.
Okay, let's stick to that.
Epic own. Let's move on from that cringe.
Douglas, let's come back to you. You don't have to call me the hottest man in the world, even if you're thinking it. Sam Smith. To me, he's just on an ever-deteriorating campaign to be as vulgar and offensive as he possibly can. Am I missing something?
He's doing what pop stars have done for decades, which is trying to shock as a means to get publicity. And, of course, it's pretty successful. I mean, we're talking about him at the moment. But it's striking that it's sort of very unoriginal. I mean, all the stuff he's doing, the sort of over-sexualized stuff, the sort of satanic stuff. Madonna did this 40 years ago. Pop stars have done this and more for decades now. I think the only thing that Sam Smith has got sort of going for him on this, and the thing actually is making people notice him on this, is that, first of all, he keeps sort of throwing these bollards in the way of everyone by changing his alleged gender all the time.
He gets marketing, doesn't he? Appeal to the old tricks and mix it up with what's popular now. Gotta appreciate the grind. The fatness especially helped his cause. He wouldn't have gotten nearly as much publicity if his meats weren't spilling out everywhere. And they say that the skinny people are the privileged ones in society. Yeah, surely.
Yeah. Okay, he came out some years ago.
Wait a second, James. I'll bring you in.
He came out many years ago as gay, and then he said he was actually gender queer, and then he said he was non-binary, and he said he didn't know what it meant. Of course he didn't, because there's no such thing. But he said that they were going to. He said that he thought that he was gender queer, and he didn't know what it meant, but he said that he would explain it someday when he did know. And I sort of think, if you're going to make everyone else distort the language, you should know what you're talking about first. So he does that to get publicity, obviously. And the other thing he does is he does this sort of taking all his clothes off stuff. And the thing that makes it different from other people is that when, I don't know, Justin Timberlake or Rihanna or someone stripped down, they do so because they look good, like their bodies look good. Sam Smith is like pudgy and very ugly. And so people look at it and he looks ridiculous. And the problem is that he's saying, don't ridicule me. But it's hard not to ridicule people when they present themselves.
Now watch the following part, where he comes clashing with the blonde guy.
Don't seriously think what we're looking at here is actually anything other than ridiculous.
No, I think it's absolutely fantastic.
Really?
Yeah, I do. I think it's brilliant. I think it's sexy. I think it's inspirational.
You think that's sexy?
That is, and that's someone exploring.
Do you think what we're looking at right now is sexy?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I mean, seriously.
Would you shag it?
Would I shag it, did you say?
Well, there's a question.
Yeah, absolutely, I would have sex with them. Thank you for asking.
You're a braver
would you,
man
Douglas?
than me.
Because it sounds like you're a little bit too obsessed with them, if I'm honest with you.
No, I can assure you I'm not. I know what I like, and I don't like fat, blubbery show-offs who look hideous, dressed in lacy pants with their fat spilling out everywhere and doing it in front of as many people as possible to gain attention. I just don't find that sexy. I'm old-fashioned.
James?
So why on earth are you friends with Piers Morgan?
Well, you'll notice, of course, that Piers hasn't appeared on this show naked with nipple tassels on.
Yes.
Douglas's overly exaggerated smile is so hilarious here. But let's move over to the most culminating part of this whole debacle.
And once again, if you act in a vulgar way, you should expect people to be vulgar about you, probably.
I think that's the point. If you're going to do what he does, it's a bit like Madonna, you know, when she says, stop objectifying me. What else are we supposed to do with Madonna, given that all she ever does is demand we objectify?
You know what? You're both cis, white, straight men. You can carry on.
I'm not a cis anything.
Right.
Honestly, I'm not. Just carry on. I don't even know what cis is.
Look, it's
what is cis?
What did you just say? If you just want to both be.
When I was born, nobody said I was a cis. What is a cis?
Hang on. I got to hear. That's not what I'm here to discuss. But what I am here to tell you is that you're completely out.
Apparently, our skin colour is now relevant.
I've got to hear that.
We're white men.
You've got your clicks.
So you're now being
viral debate.
So you're now being racist and calling me a sissy or something.
Hang on, Piers. Wait a second. What did he just say?
What did you call us? Repeat it for Douglas.
I said you were both. I can't remember, to be honest with you.
Cis, white.
I think you said. Okay, why don't you shut up for a moment?
Straight,
I think you said.
Well, Douglas isn't
I think
straight.
you said that we're.
Now watch what's about to happen next. Everybody take cover.
I think you said we're both cis, white, straight men. First of all, I am white. Secondly, I am a man. Thirdly, I've been out and gay my entire adult life, which is about 25 years now. I don't know how old you are.
But I
was out as gay when you were still prancing around talking about whether or not you were. So do be quiet. Do stop judging other people. And if I were you, I'd do a
judging
little
other
bit of
people? Are you joking?
I would do a little.
Oh my God, Douglas, that's ridiculous. I'm not the one judging other people here. I'm just pointing out facts. I'm sorry I got your sexuality wrong.
No, if I were you, I would do the tiniest bit of research before opening your mouth. You're embarrassing yourself. That's probably why people wouldn't want to come to your show.
I think you're embarrassing yourself. Gentlemen, you're a shame to the queer community.
You know what? I tell you who's really embarrassing.
I'm not a member of the queer community, you stupid sod.
I tell you,
I'm not a member of the queer community.
The person who ultimately is genuinely embarrassing himself, herself, themselves, whatever, is Sam Smith. On that note, we'll leave it.
That was epic. No one can pull it off quite the way Douglas does. That kid thought he could dominate the Indomitable just by being louder than him. But Douglas's powerful message sidestepped him quickly. And it's something that he points out through all of his messages. And that's the fact that the fight for equality is weaponized against free speech, and it's used for spreading some very stupid ideas. Which is why he will never shut up about it, and he will always push against the mob. Anyway, that's also all that we had for today. If you want to watch how Douglas brutally trolls Islam, then you can click the video that popped up on screen, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.